All right, this afternoon's presentation is about landscape conservation and who really gets it. We have two speakers this afternoon who really do get it. I think I prefer the title to follow up on the Secretary's luncheon plenary of epic collaboration, because both of these individuals that we have on stage with us are epic collaborators. So our first presentation will be by Governor Geringer, and our second by Regional Director Cindy Driscoll. Governor Geringer has a Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Kansas State University. He told me earlier this morning he's an engineer by training, a farmer by choice, and a governor by accident. I understand that if you enjoy his presentation, which I think you will, that you can also look up more presentations by him on TED, so keep that in mind. He is the former governor of Wyoming and is the current president of Esri, but in his former life he was, director of Esri. And I think most of us know and love Esri quite well. I've worked with him quite a bit. In a former life, he worked for NASA. He actually launched the first satellites with GPS on them, and now he's kind of come back full circle working for Esri. And he tells me also that he's fascinated by decision making, which I think is why he's here today. So, Governor.
Thank you. And my conversation is titled, "When Will They Get It?" And I hope that becomes obvious as I go through this. I'm going to talk largely about how GIS was very fascinating to me as a decision-making tool during my time in office and even since then. So I'll be talking about it in terms of things such as going back to a comment made by Gifford Pinchot, the forester back in 1905 when the Forest Service was created. He said, "Where conflicting interests must be reconciled, the question will always be decided from the standpoint of the greatest good of the greatest number in the long run." For those in the back, I will tell you what's on the slide and I will tell you what conclusion you should draw, so please rest easy. I know you can't see them. We thought it would be a more amenable situation. I want to emphasize, though, in the long run, because that has a lot to do with large landscape conservation. I will talk about GIS today, but I want to put it in terms, first of all, of I'm from Esri, and yes, I'm going to be really extolling the virtues of GIS, but I'm not selling anything, not selling a product. I'm selling a concept for decision makers, and if you are an NGO, a nonprofit, an educator of any kind, you can have it for free. Let me let that sink in for a minute. Free. Now let's go on. So today I will talk about sustainable versus sustainability, the increasing role of technology and citizen involvement, personal choices in making decisions at all levels, collaboration and policy. Epic collaboration would be finding a way to say yes. Quite often in difficult situations, people can find all kinds of ways to say no. My philosophy is, let's find a way to say yes. How technology can enable conservation and resource management, and how GIS and remote sensing are both examples of tools of how we can integrate public as well as private information and take complex information that managers can accommodate different points of view, values and points of view. So let me start with the term, what do you mean by sustainable? And I take this from the World Conservation Union definition. Sustainable is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Sounds good, but there are two fundamental issues. Environmental degradation typically accompanies economic growth, yet such growth is needed to alleviate poverty, or in other words, sustain the economy or promote economic activity. And can we balance environment, economic growth, and community? My experience is yes, but it's been very difficult to find that balance. So what sustainability must our environment and resources have in order to have sustainable development? Now, questions I would propose to this group would be the following. Is something significant happening in my place? Place relates to geography, relates to GIS. Is it a consequence of or benefit to my place? And if so, how should the problem be solved? And should society or government do something about it? Should I do something about it? Now we're getting right down to the heart of it. And what would my part be? Think of this in personal terms. That's how all good collaboration starts. So for me, GIS is and has been a platform for perspective and action. In my view, a decision maker's dream. GIS is a governor's information system. GIS, get that? It's the practical means to manage for conserving large landscapes because it's visual, integrative, quantitative, I would say also analytic, systematic and comprehensive, all-encompassing, and you can understand interrelationships. There are many examples. I've seen several of them today in the breakout sessions. I'm very pleased because you're further along in many aspects than I could ever have dreamed, yet there is still much ground to be covered. So carbon sequestration, forest health, landscape planning, recreation and tourism, they're just a few of the examples that are listed up here, many more that you've each talked about today. I put this visual up. It shows the land cover as a composite from the European Space Agency recent release of Land Cover 2010. It's also to exemplify that we almost always just put up a picture of the lower 48 states. We exclude the rest of North America, and that particularly irks Alaska and Hawaii and Puerto Rico and others like that. I forgot the Marianas, Samoa, and Guam. I'm sorry if you're here from there. And the red spots on here indicate urban areas. So in a way, the landscape, this is a picture that illustrates how far-flung large landscapes can be. And even the Yellowstone to the Yukon doesn't even begin to help us understand how it reaches across boundaries. This is from the European Space Agency's Proba 5 mini satellite that orbits the Earth every 2 days, and it provides land cover and vegetation growth every 2 days across the planet. And you couple something like this with Landsat data, and you have an extraordinary current view of what's going on that can be evaluated for current time, like the deforestation in Brazil that this represents, and over a period of time to understand trends. Let me shift to the West. Those of you who sat in on the chat, the Crucial Habitat Assessment Tool, or heard references to Wyoming, you'll recognize some of these up there: the wolf, the toad, the pronghorn, the sage grouse. Those are just a few of the things that introduce the opportunity to collaborate or to fight, which we do very well in both. This is an older map of the National Atlas, and I put it up there as a means to say, if you wonder why so much of conservation is talked about only in the West, it's because the residual lands that the federal government inherited or retained are in the West. And it's a mixed bag of ownership. And I put it up because I have an extensive history across 4 different presidential administrations about how to get along or how to exemplify not getting along over all this. So Western land management has always been fragmented, oftentimes uncoordinated and not very collaborative, because with all the agencies that have an opportunity to manage the land, none of them is exclusive. They're all intermingled. So there's concurrent, not exclusive jurisdiction, shared responsibilities, local impact on economic and social issues, which leads to a lot of animosity and adversity. Still a little too common. That affects everything you can imagine that goes on in the West. It's not just the issues of conservation like land, air, water, agriculture. It's the economy, it's transportation, it could be health, it could be education. So growth and change were and still are fragmented as we talk about land use, transportation, oil and gas and mining. Policy and business decisions were considered incrementally and often in isolation, and still are. So the issue is, with all those impacts on the economy, energy, environmental, subdivision encroachment, what's the problem? Conflicts are the problem. How do we come up with decisions for public and private decision makers to come to a conclusion when they each have competing alternatives? Can we put those alternatives on a plate and solve it so we have a resource and land use assessment using the tools that are available to us? Well, the most powerful tool that I've experienced is GIS, because it provides data integration, analysis, and options. I emphasize options. Decision makers want to know, well, what else could I do? And is there a way where if I weight my items that are important to me, you weight the items that are important to you, and we go through an analysis, can we come up with a solution that gets all of us very close to what we each wanted individually? That's the essence of collaboration, not capitulation, which I keep hearing about. So that system of collaboration and action focuses us on things that are in common, how to gather data, how to share tools, how to share ideas, and bring it together into a decision support system such as the Crucial Habitat Assessment tool. The lower right-hand visual is the pronghorn corridors up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So GIS is a platform today that can be in the cloud, so that if you don't have the expertise in your organization, or you want to do something that even a governor or other elected or major managerial official could understand, they can even use it today. It doesn't have to be by a specialist. So citizens, policymakers, government agencies, scientists can all participate, especially citizens. Many of them can be your citizen scientists to provide conservation as a service. So a few of the examples that I would illustrate are using GIS: forest restoration over in Missouri and Oregon, the USDA Forest Service National Forest Atlas, Nature Conservancy, the priority conservation areas, and land cover change in Wisconsin. Now note this title. I know that there was quite a reaction to, yes, when are we going to do something about climate change? I still bear the scars of mediating between those who are and are not. They're not just the cynics, they're also the skeptics out there. So I say, well, whether it's climate change or a climate oscillation, there is something happening in my place. What can I do about it? And what information might come to bear, such as temperature changes over in the Rogue River Canyon in Oregon, land cover changes, precipitation changes across the globe. What are the patterns that are out there that are both extreme as well as unusual? The climate modeling, real-time temperature changes. Those are all issues that we want to look at, along with resource and water interactions. The North American Drought Monitor showing the hot spots, literally, in the Southwest currently. The drought intensity over time just below it that shows over the last 10 years, drought overall has not exceeded too much the overall amount, but the severity of drought has certainly exceeded it. So water stress is everywhere. When it comes to forest health in a changing world, the bark beetle infestation in the West, gypsy moths elsewhere, insect and disease risk, all of these are using GIS to not only map out what is, but what could be, provided we have alternatives and what to do and take care of them. And you put all those data layers onto a base map that give you the ability to understand and model what things could be, not just what is. A static map is usable only for one moment in time. A dynamic map is one that can be constantly updated so that decision makers practice the best policy. Now, the conservation drivers that I would list means that we need to have increasing fundamental scientific understanding and also be promoting economic vitality, balancing the economy and the environment, protecting life and property, enabling stewardship, while we understand how the earth works and then how the earth should look and how we should look at the earth. Those are all the issues that we need to keep in mind as we look at large-scale conservation. For decision makers then, there's the issue of measurement, which is data, prediction, analytics, preparation, planning, design, evaluation, so that you can decide, act, and manage. Far too often decision makers only looked at, I'm going to decide, I'm going to act, and then manage with what I have. They really ought to look at those precursors and say, what could I have done if I had paid attention to the data, if I had believed the source of the data? There's a lot of prerequisites there to enabling collaboration. I point out that the entire Congress now has the opportunity to use GIS as a decision-making tool. The architect of the Capitol, the Library of Congress, the Senate, the House, the Congressional Research Service that puts a lot of that together for the leadership so that they can make decisions on such inconsequential items as the Farm Bill, the Keystone Pipeline, hydraulic fracturing. I didn't say they made decisions, I said they could make decisions. So why use a GIS system for conservation? I want to point out the very first bullet. It says landscape management has a unique meaning for every individual. That's where it starts. If I don't buy in, I will always be trying to shuffle it off to somebody else. Data cannot be properly analyzed in isolation. Large landscape management should be initiated, analyzed, and viewed holistically, comprehensively, and in context. You can enable the convergence of technology, so whatever imagery you have, or LiDAR, or full 3D GIS, that can be combined with the actual data, other data that's collected and integrated, analyzed, and referenced in a geospatial way. For my own home state of Wyoming, this is an old map, but it at least illustrates the checkerboard pattern, not just along the railroad, along the southern portion of where the UP Railroad went, but the blue dots represent school sections of land owned by the state, dedicated to the maintenance of the schools early on. 15 types of surface owners, but then you impose on that the oil and gas that has a split estate. Surface owner is different from the mineral estate owner. Then you impose coal and coal bed methane, or the sage-grouse habitat. And I could add water, and I could add any number of other issues out there, and almost every one of these are presented in isolation, not in context, unless you have the ability to integrate all those into a GIS system for analytics. Or you can include fracking. These are all the shale plays in the United States. And then you introduce, from a North American perspective, well, I apologize for leaving Mexico off this map, the impact of the water stress with the developments out there, the competition for and the conflict over water. Water is becoming the most contentious issue that we have to deal with, including in places such as the Delaware River Valley, the 4 states that are impacted there, for flow management in the river basin, or protecting critical flows. At the same time, the Marcellus Shale is being evaluated for development. So questions from decision makers, oftentimes it's the past, the present, and the future. What happened? I have the metrics on reporting and through dashboards. Why did it happen? I have the understanding it's fed through data, but then for the current situation, what is happening? In the middle, real-time analytics. Why did it happen? How can I engage the data in a timely way so that for predicting and looking to the future, what's likely to happen? Predictive analytics, what should I do about it? Prescriptive analytics, GIS doesn't make the decision for you. It enables a much better decision through the prescriptive and predictive analytics so that you can understand the consequences or benefits. So to enable better policy and decisions in a way that provides systematic knowledge and an integrative framework, analytic methods, intuitive visualization, I point out that policymakers are capable of understanding complex subjects, but they have to convey their thoughts and their decisions to others in easily grasped terms. GIS does that. It has been the tool I've used often and willingly as a way to communicate. Visualization and maps communicate better than almost any other way to portray a complex issue, which is the power of GIS, to understand patterns, relationships, and processes. So, what can you do? Number one, you can bring people together to share. And Jim Levitt, thank you for making this happen. So we can share experiences, ideas, information, values. Values are so important. And the approaches we can take to solve the issues. Anyone in here can become a convener to bring people together, become a trusted advisor for the decision makers, and know the issue and enable the technology, the GIS in particular, to help portray that issue. What's needed to make all that happen? Commitment at the policy level, very important. Collaborative framework and community-based solutions with regional coordination. Never overlook the value of the community. That is where it all happens and has to start. I pulled up this statement on spatial information from the conference in Nairobi, that development and implementation of a spatial data infrastructure is a prerequisite for promoting sustainable development. Again, I'm not selling a product, I'm selling a concept, a powerful decision-making tool. With the advent of increasingly large volumes of data, more interest than ever by the public for wanting to become involved, how can we best communicate that? At the same time, I call to mind the past and the present. Quotes from Jefferson first. The success of our democracy lies in ordinary citizens vested with deep civic responsibility. Citizens who engage each other directly in the pursuit of the common good. Or from Bill Ruckelshaus. Business, government, and citizens frustrated by years of litigation have begun to turn to the common good, sometimes out of desperation, but more frequently out of hope. Well, I'll close with this quote, and I don't even know the source, but it sums it all up for me. In a free democracy, the leaders and the majority of the people are committed to doing what's best for the nation as a whole. But when the community spirit breaks down, when people only pursue selfish interests, government chooses to impose laws, regulation, and controls, each designed to force people to consider others because they have to, not because they want to. These are the instruments of bondage, not of freedom. Remember that conservation is not a selfish right, it's an awesome responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Elsa Habold. I'm the National LCC or LCC Network Coordinator, and it is now my distinct honor and privilege to introduce a longtime friend and colleague. I've worked with Cynthia Dohner, not Driscoll, for the past more than a decade. When I worked for Florida Fish and Wildlife, we worked together on manatee issues, and she demonstrated then and continues to and always has the collaborative nature of her. Before she became regional director, she was Sam Hamilton's deputy regional director in the Southeast, which covers the Southeast states, Puerto Rico, and most of the Caribbean. And she is now the Department of the Interior's, in addition to working on manatees and having a marine biology degree, she is now their authorized official for Deepwater Horizon, so she's really having to stretch the limits on collaboration and in conservation and restoring the Gulf of Mexico. So Cindy, come on up.
Good afternoon. It is such an honor to be here and tell you a little bit about what we're doing in the Southeast, so I really appreciate the opportunity. I want to tell you a little bit about something that's happening in my place, sir. So I thought I would let you know what's going on. So we're going to talk about the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy. Just so you guys know, there is information on this strategy right as you go outside here on a table. One thing I want to briefly tell you about is the Southeast and what's been going on. So the Southeast United States grew in population 14.3% in the past decade. And by 2050, that'll be 20% more people. So we're seeing an increase in the population down here. We also have demographic changes like a lot of people are seeing, rural to metropolitan, changes in the practices on the landscape from agriculture to the developments that we have. You also have other stressors, including energy development and climate change, increased demands for fresh water now in the Southeast that we're seeing. So we saw quite a bit of this, and we see more and more of this over the past few years. And you realize that resource management challenges, they don't understand administrative boundaries, they don't understand borders, they don't understand any of that. So the goals and the objectives for sustaining fish and wildlife, they exceed the operational reach of the federal agencies and the state agencies that we have. And we have to have this, as Secretary Jewell said, epic collaboration to make a difference, especially across the Southeast, and I would say just about everywhere. Just so you know that in the Southeast, we have 10 states, we have Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and my mission is to work with others. The Fish and Wildlife Service's mission is to work with others to protect, conserve, and enhance fish and wildlife for the benefit of future generations. It's a big job. And the states have very similar missions. Well, in that Southeast region, I have 5 million acres. I have 5 million acres. I have to collaborate to make sure I can take care of my mission. So one of the things that we did is several years ago, starting in 2011, we were working with the directors of the Southeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. It's 15 southeastern states, and Puerto Rico and the Caribbean are included in that. So it's larger than my region. And those states agreed that one thing that we needed to have was a Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy. And this strategy is going to take into account that increased population and that climate change and those other stressors on the landscape as we go forward. And it's going to help us predict where we need to go in the future. So those fish and wildlife populations can adapt to the changes, whether it's urbanization or it's climate change. So as we go forward, it's something that we've been working on for a while. We also went and asked all the federal agencies that are in the Southeast. There's 12 federal agencies that we have included in this. So we have all the states and all the federal agencies working on this collaborative effort to develop a tool that will allow people to not only help plan where we need to go, how we need to go, but where we need to ensure we need to adapt as we go forward. What we did is there's a point of contact for each one of those. I know you can't read those, but it's in the fact sheet. So each state, each federal agency has has a point of contact, and they brought that information with them to share their resources, bring their expertise, bring their data layers. We've been using GIS and the platform that we need to do to develop this information. One of the other things that we've done is the state said the LCCs, the Landscape Conservation Cooperatives, are key to doing this. This is what they've been working on, and I think Greg mentioned this a little bit today and maybe in one of the breakout sessions. There's 6 LCCs that are involved in this across the Southeast, and there's 2 of the climate science centers that you know about. So what we've done is bring everybody together that we can, and we're bringing more and more people in. There's over 100 different entities involved now, and thousands of people have been coming together to help with the development of this tool. What I'm going to do is just briefly highlight some of the things that are being pulled together right now and being developed that will then pull in and be part of this tool. We expect this to be done by 2016, and we hope that we'll be able to launch it at that time. And just so you guys know, our goal is to have an end user tool so that a county planner will be able to use this information, and as they're either doing permits or they're doing grants, they'll be able to look at it and realize where the state or the county or the federal agencies, where are those things that we want to avoid to allow not only fish and wildlife on the landscape and have those benefits, but keep the working lands working, deal with the urbanization, and allow the Southeast to grow as we go forward. So a few things that we have, examples. The first one is the South Atlantic Conservation Blueprint. So it's a shared vision for the future. Private, state, and federal organizations are developing a vision for the South Atlantic geography. It's a spatially explicit living plan that describes the places and actions needed to meet the cooperative shared conservation objectives in the face of future change. So one thing that they did is they've established natural resource indicators to help them develop that blueprint. And then we have shared goals and objectives for fish and wildlife populations, and they're equated back to that so we can design that landscape. The next one is the Ozarks Highlands Cooperative Conservation Strategy, and that's the integration of the state wildlife action plans, and it's across the Ozarks so we can find priority areas for sustaining fish and wildlife populations in this area. Florida Alternative Conservation Futures. This is one of the ones that also provides a landscape that'll give you ideas as you go forward with different scenarios in Florida for the future for easements and fee simple acquisition for land conservation. We also have the Caribbean Atlas for Management Planning, or El Campo, spatially explicit representation of priority indicator resources, drivers, vulnerabilities, and priorities on where we need to go for, again, fish and wildlife. So what they're doing, basically, what we're working on is, like we said, assessing the future urban landscape. So this will be assessing the future urban landscape, the one for Appalachian and the Gulf Coast Plain and Ozarks LCCs, and this is part of CRAP. This is one more that we're looking at across the board on how we go forward with the urbanization. The Gulf Coast Vulnerability Assessment. This is a tool that numerous LCCs, all the ones that border the Gulf, are developing a vulnerability assessment as we go forward for the lands, so that as the Gulf restoration goes forward, which I know was also another panel session that will give us the information on priority areas for landscapes and for resistance and the vulnerability as going forward. So these are just some of the ones we have. Again, this is a cumulative risk of flow alterations for SARP, and SARP is the South Aquatic Restoration Program, SARP. It's the same states, it's the development of the same states, federal agencies, very numerous private entities that are involved in this, and it's focusing on aquatic. This SARP is part of the bigger effort with the LCCs and part of this bigger effort for CCAS on where we go in the priority areas for aquatics. This is one more, the monitoring network. These are all pieces and parts that are being developed that are going to be integrated overall into the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy. This is a work in progress, as you see. This is the beginning of the development of the prioritization so that we can see where we need to go for changes on the landscape to make sure that we can adapt for the wildlife so that we know where the priority areas are to allow wildlife to adapt to the changing conditions, but also ensure we have a landscape that can support those populations of fish and wildlife. So again, what we're looking at is the landscape now, 2010, but we're going to go out to 2060. Some of the tools that we have in this are the GIS, the advances that you have at Esri with the tool called the Collector, where you'll be able to download it to any type of smartphone or the tablets and the iPads that we have. So people can input data real time and it can be collected and integrated as we need to go forward. With a landscape this big, we're gonna have to ensure that we have a tool that can collect that information as we go forward. So this is just a quick example of what we're doing in the Southeast. What this will do is this will not only allow us as we go forward to work with everybody on the land, but it will also allow us as we go forward to minimize those priority areas that we need for fish and wildlife. It'll help us preclude, hopefully, the listing of endangered species or the listing of species that could become endangered in the future. It'll allow working lands to stay working and keep economies vibrant as we go forward. The intent is to allow this tool to help people as we go forward again to adapt to those, the changes that are coming. One thing that I will tell you, I know that there were several discussions on the chats, and you mentioned it during your conversation. One of the things that the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies are looking at, they're investigating the idea of taking the information that we have in the chats, and then there's the information that the northeastern states are also doing, in the hopes that one day we'll be able to have this integrated network across the nation of a seamless network that'll provide this type of information. Like we said earlier, wildlife, they don't know the boundaries, and we have to figure out how we work together. So thank you. You need it? I guess you don't need it. No.
All right, and that concludes the plenary. I hope you'll find Regional Director Dohner and Governor Geringer in the lobby with the bar, but Jim needs to close out the day. So thanks, everybody.
So Cindy said to me as we were talking about this session that as I went through that idea of inspired leadership at the national level, regional coordination, and local implementation, she said, you gotta be real with these people. It's going to take regional leadership as well to get the job done. And it's going to take iteration after iteration of these very advanced tools that you're all working with right now to make it clear for future generations. So I want to thank you both for very, very nice presentations.